Think about your favorite boss, or bosses if there's more than one. What makes them so great to you? Is it the memories with friends, a great story tied off, or just a mechanical and dramatic splendor of a fight? There's not a wrong answer, since it's for you. I do think there are objective ways of measuring a boss and creating good boss design. This video will go over the more textbook definition, and I will have fewer examples. However, part 2, I'll be going over a lot more video game bosses, about what works about them and what doesn't. I will break them down and explain why people may have seen this boss as great or not so fun. There may be a part 3 where I take community requests and explain as well. The generic gameplay is going to be from Skyrim, and I'll be using video game footage from other creators in this video and future videos. Please check out their channel, as it will be in the description as well on the screen, and I will not be playing the volume if they talk or commentate, as you should see their video for their reactions and commentary. I'm merely using their footage as just a objective standpoint for the things I am talking about. Before we get into specific games, what goes into a boss? Every boss is broken down into 2 categories for me: theme and mechanics. Theme is lore, story, and relation to the world itself. This also includes stylistic options. My quick opinion, if a boss is to be worse or to suffer in one area, often theme is the one that can be lacking but not ruin a boss fight. That's because if you don't really pay attention to a story or understand the lore, you can still appreciate the mechanical side of it. If a boss is just mostly story heavy but doesn't work out mechanically, it's a lot more obvious and will probably be lower on your list, as that is the actual playable experience. If you hit both on the head though, you probably have a very good boss. Breaking down lore further, lore is past events / background of how things were or what has happened in the world. Lore often talks about legends or great wars people do not exactly remember to every detail. Story is what you are playing in the current breath, and you can change that. Both are key, but both are distinctly different. You can have a boss with a great story, but the lore could be almost non-existent. Opposite is true as well, as the boss could be talked about in lore to great detail, but have almost no interaction with the current story. Neither is right, neither is wrong, but the difference is there. Relation to the world: is this boss meant to be a big bad, a minor boss, a joke of a boss, beginner? The spot in which the boss is placed in the world is highly important, and the stylistic options need to match. Final bosses in theory should get the biggest boost from the theme standpoint, as they have been along for the whole story and should have the most lore or relation to them. Pulling a switcheroo for the final boss could easily kill all momentum in the game if done incorrectly. A final boss switch needs to be done well, and it needs to relate back to the story or lore itself. Pulling a switcheroo just to get a reaction may not be the best and will probably end in massive disappointment and failure. There have been some forms of media in the past 4 to 5 years that have done switcheroos, and you can see the reaction from that. If you're going to pull a switcheroo, it needs to make sense, and it needs to be something you could have foreseen, but it was just a little less obvious. The second part is mechanics. This is made up of attacks / their gimmicks sometimes, HP, damage, movement, location, relation to the terrain / boss layer, and difficulty. For the most part, these are the easiest things to see and critique, as this is what we're actually playing against. This is what makes us mad or happy usually. Attacks is how the boss does damage. Damage is how much it subtracts from your HP. HP is how much a boss can take in terms of your damage. How quickly or uniquely a boss moves is movement. Location is there lava, or is there other things that is flying around the arena. Does the boss layer interact, such as roots try to grab you? And the generic difficulty, which usually is a result of all of those in terms of how high or how low they make them. Difficulty is not above mechanics, because everything can be balanced, but the boss can be easy. I just kind of threw in difficulty in there as a part of it, because you have to consider where this boss is at and if it should be harder or easier based on everything else. And a great example of this is intro bosses. Intro bosses can be perfectly balanced and really fun, but obviously they're there to teach you the mechanics of the game and to be easier. A good intro boss is important for the story and feel, but are often the lowest on the totem pole in terms of difficulty, or at least close to it. That does not mean the bosses are poorly designed, it just means they were designed to be easier, which means that mechanics is above difficulty. Now that we have gone over what goes into a boss, let's break down 2 bosses to conclude this video. I will be breaking down a boss I've seen on a few lists from Legend of Zelda, Koloktos, and the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3, one of my personal favorites. I'll be doing a deeper dive into Koloktos and a much less deeper dive into the Nameless King. The reason for that is there's other people who do much better lore sections of the Nameless King, so I won't disgrace those videos. But I will be talking about mechanically the Nameless King a lot. As part of just generic video game design and also boss design, almost every boss in Legend of Zelda goes by the rule of 3, which means obviously you have to do something 3 times for something to happen. It's not necessarily bad, it's predictable, which can be nice, but at the same time, that can sometimes be a little boring or a little too repetitive. Now, on to Koloktos. I will admit I never played this boss, therefore I had to do some extra research for the theme side. From what I gathered, he was made by Girahim, who is the main boss of the game, / main antagonist. Instantly, this boss has credibility in reference to the final antagonist, which should give it a boost in terms of thematics. Second, this boss guards a sacred flame, which you need, and you guessed it, there are 3 of them, and it guards 1 of them. Thus, this boss becomes a mandatory boss, which helps. It has reference to the part of the world it's in, and the main antagonist. These are all good things. Finally, Koloktos is theorized to be referenced to the story of the Spider's Thread, which is told from the angle of Gautama Buddha. I have not read the story itself, but the plot summary is rather intriguing and has a good lesson in the end. Buddha stops and stares into a lotus-filled pond where he can see into the depths of hell. He singles out one particular sinner, Kandata, who was a cold-hearted criminal, except one day he did decide not to crush a spider. This act of not crushing the spider relates to a teaching that all things are equal in the world, thus killing an insect is seen as cold-hearted and practically murder. Moved by this one choice of compassion, Buddha lets a spider on a silver thread descend into the depths of hell. Obviously the spider was spared, thus the spider will save him. Great. And Kandata can take his chance to escape. The trip is not short out of hell, and he begins to tire climbing the thread. However, when he looks back and realizes how far he's come, he gets an extra burst of energy and strength. He also notices that all the other sinners down there also begin climbing the same thread he is, as obviously it's a chance out of hell. He claims the thread is his and his alone, and at that statement, the thread snaps. The greed and regard only for his life cause the web to snap, and this saddens Buddha. Now, that's a lot of information, and honestly, I cannot entirely say if it relates to this area, but if it does, it will probably click way more for you than it did me. However, the area is also thematically very representative of Eastern temple styles, and Koloktos himself is very Buddha-esque in the statue. Thus, thematically, I'd say this boss is doing excellent. Now for the mechanics. The intro scene alone tells you a few things about the boss. The middle red thing is obviously the weak point, and after showing that, Koloktos covers it with both of his hands. Thus, you now know you need to figure out 2 things. 1, can you attack the weak spot, and what is the move set of the boss? Quickly, you begin to realize Koloktos will strike the ground, leaving time for you to rip off his arms with the whip. The gimmick of ripping the boss apart, I would imagine, feels very good and satisfying. For me personally, Legend of Zelda games usually don't have the most back-breaking boss in terms of difficulty, but the game genre often prides itself more on the puzzle solving and using the item you've gained in that dungeon. This boss appears to be no exception. As you rip the arms off, you receive an opportunity to attack. Eventually in the video you will see the person get hit, and I wish the boss had a little bit more damage, as taking away 1 heart with a hit's really not enough when you look at A, the amount of hearts you have, and B, the fact that you can pick up hearts later, which you will see. The phase repeats itself as he strikes the ground again and again, reinforcing the strategy on how to beat him. His arena will come into play later, but currently the boss is pretty simple as he doesn't move. Not until he stands up does the boss get another layer in all areas in the mechanics. It stands! The stationary boss provided a sense of safety and comfort to learn the basic move, but now a cage covers the weak spot and he's coming after you. It does question what you knew previously, but and this is something I could slightly complain about. The boss does the same exact strategy again of driving the swords into the ground. This is where you rip off the arms once again. Now what I will say is, it is actually very fun to use the swords that it drops / arms to beat the boss. So now that you're on equal footing, and it feels like you're doing massive damage to the boss as you chip away at the cage. The later stages of the boss fight does begin making circular attacks, which you do have to run away from and dodge until it strikes in the ground, so that is a little different than the stationary obviously, so the moveset does change. And you guessed it again maybe. You need to rip off the arms and beat his weak spot 3 more times to kill him. A final scorecard from me. Theme, it gets an A from what I can tell. If you played Skyward Sword, please let me know if you think Koloktos fit thematically and fit feel-wise. I think, based on what I've seen, I would say he does. Mechanics, I would say B+. My only issue with the boss is the amount of damage, and that may be due to a difficulty setting, I'm not entirely sure. It seemed rather lackluster in the terms of damage displayed, compared to how much HP you have. Maybe taking away 1 heart when you have 4 HP is a lot, but when you have like 7 to 8 hearts, it seems like too many mistakes, especially since you can heal as well. The gimmick is good, as ripping the boss apart would be fun. The stationary approach was great at first, as it throws a curveball as he begins to stand and chase you around this swirling motion. If the boss was slightly more deadly, I think this would be a rock solid boss for the ages. Now for one of my favorite bosses, the Nameless King. Theme wise, I won't get into it. There are other people who do a great job at attracting the lore and presenting it better than I would. Therefore, go check out their channels, you probably know who they are in terms of Dark Souls. However, this boss mechanically, I think is great. First, let's talk about the arena. I love this area. It's simplistic, but it's also stylistic with the statues and the sky setting / feel. It's almost like you're fighting in the heavens. It can be a little easy to lose track of distance and where you are, which makes you feel small in comparison, or fighting in a much larger arena than you possibly could even know. The boss has 2 stages, the Wyvern fight and obviously the bad boy himself. For the most part, the Wyvern fight is rather easily choreographed and you have a few good opportunities to really lay damage into the Wyvern. Nameless King himself is also not idle, as he strikes at the top of you and also casts lightning down. A combination of man and beast creates a good first part, and the HP amount isn't too terribly high, thus you don't feel like you're spending most of your resources trying to get past the first phase. The second part is where I love it. The speed of the Nameless King is just fast enough that greed is punished quickly, but patience and understanding the moveset is greatly rewarded. He can close the distance quickly, thus keeping him at range is not completely viable, and staying in close can mean getting comboed to death easily. His infusion with lightning adds another flare as well. His damage doesn't exactly one-shot you in most scenarios, which allows you for mistakes, which is great because I made plenty and I'm sure other people have as well. The difficulty is hard, but after learning the boss's moveset and getting enough levels, he does get significantly easier, which means the boss is balanced. The boss design itself is awesome. He moves fluidly and has a large set of moves, which keeps the fight interesting and on your toes for what's going to happen next. I am biased, but to me, this boss is an A in theme and an A in mechanics. Now that we've kind of defined what a good boss is or has, think about some of your favorite as asked in the beginning. Maybe pull out a couple of those going, okay, I like the boss because mechanically it's really good, but maybe it didn't fit in the story well, where you're thinking, you know what? It was the best boss story-wise. The fight was a little boring, but thematically, how they tied it in, the choices you made the boss perfect. Who cares if it was easy or simple to figure out? It fits so well in the theme, I can forgive all mechanical unbalances to it. In part 2, which will eventually come out, like I said, it will be just bosses. I will pull from a variety of games, and then in that same video, if that's received well, I will put up something to ask for the bosses you want me to critique and see what I think of them. I probably haven't played them, but I definitely won't mind watching videos of them and giving my 2 cents from an objective standpoint. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe below.